good morning, and welcome to the Africa Weekly Talk. Today's subject on the docket is the useless African Union and its 38th AU Summit that took place in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, last week, February 12th through the 16th, with the theme Justice for Africans and Peoples of African Descent Through Reparations. This was the theme of this year's 2025 AU Summit that took place in Addis Ababa. Justice for Africans and Peoples of African Descent Through Reparations. Fellows, I don't know what this theme is all about, but this theme sounds more like justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations is against former colonial masters. So basically asking for justice for former colonial masters of what has been going on and what has happened prior to Africans becoming independent. It is unfortunate, fellows, for me to speak negatively of the AU, an organization founded in 1966 as the Organization of African Union, the OAU, by great African leaders, Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Haile Selassie, Julius Nyerere, and so on. And 60 years later, for the AU, which transitioned from OAU in 2002 in South Africa to be known and called AU, to have a theme asking for justice for Africa and Africans of peoples of African descent through reparations. I don't get it. 60 years of independent African countries. This is the theme that the AU is talking about. And I strongly believe this is in reference to former colonial masters and slavery and so on and so forth. I have no qualms for reparations for Africans or African Americans or Africans in the Caribbean and so on. But as an organization, it's about time to look for justice for the 55 African countries that exist on that continent. Because you have not been able to even give justice to the citizens of this great continent, but rather you are waiting for justice from your former colonial masters. That's why I have a problem with this theme of this year's AU Summit. It is unfortunate, fellows. It is unfortunate. When I say the AU is a useless organization, this is why I say AU is a useless organization. This is an organization that has been in existence for 60 years. And the 60 years, this organization has become like an enabler to bad governance, corruption, and abuse of power all throughout the continent. And then for this organization to be seeking for justice from former colonial masters is just ridiculous, fellows. It's just ridiculous. Because at the end of the day, the African Union should be an organization that today should be talking about the development and what it has done for the African continent for the past 60 years since it was founded as OAU. But this organization has a very poor record. African citizens deserve way better than what this organization has given them. African citizens deserve better than what this organization has given them so far. This organization was founded by great leaders with vision and foresight. Leaders like Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, with the belief of African unity, African socio-economic development through its natural resources, and Africa representing Africa with one voice to the world. That was the main principles, the founding principles of the African Union. To be independent and to speak with one voice at the world organizations. But unfortunately, you go onto the continent of Africa today, it's rift with civil wars, bad governance, bad leadership, corruption, abuse of power, and so on and so forth by leaders of their various countries towards their own fellow citizens. And to have a summit that is calling for justice from former colonial masters when you haven't even given justice to your own citizens. That is a shame. That is a shame, fellows. I mean, the African Union is like a toothless bulldog, fellows. I mean, it's nothing new, like they always do. When every year you have leaders from various countries come onto these podiums at these big summits and then give big talks. I mean, they talk big, talk about the prospects of Africa. I mean, the capabilities of Africa. What Africa has in terms of natural resources, the potential, and what it can be done, and what can be used. And after these summits, you don't hear about any of these development or anything anymore. So it's like a toothless bulldog. It barks, quack, 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 but can't do anything, can't bite. And now these people expect the former colonial masters who are still in control of this organization to somehow give them justice. You're sitting down there in Africa and hoping for former colonial masters to come and give you justice. That's what we are talking about, fellas. Are you kidding me? It ain't happening. Former colonial masters ain't going to give you no justice. And they ain't going to give you reparations. It's about time we move on. Kwame Nkrumah and the former great and past leaders of Africa are rolling in their graves right now as I speak. To hear that the organization that they founded with the goal of Africa's independence from former colonial powers to unite as a united front to fight for African freedom and African unity and stand as a united body against the rest of the world in Africa's socio-economic development, to hear them now asking for justice from the very countries that colonized and ripped Africa off of its resources. It's a shame. 60 years of Africa's independence, we shouldn't be talking about asking for justice from any former colonial master. I'm sorry. Some people might have different opinion, but I don't believe in that. I believe 60 years of independence, by now, we should have established our countries to the extent that we don't need to still be waiting for former colonial masters to come and give us anything, let alone justice. When we have even given justice to our own citizens, when our own continent is rift with civil wars all over the continent, that the AU, the organization that is supposed to be able to curb these things, to be an organization where to resolve conflict in order for this conflict not to get into this situation where it is right now. AU has not been able to do any of that. That is why I said the AU is a useless organization. I mean, can anybody tell me any record of the AU, of its functional abilities that have generated any development or anything for African countries that they know of? I don't know of any. All I know is that they keep collecting money from foreign governments. Foreign government building their headquarters and financing AU every year. I mean, and that's why I said it's a useless organization, fellas. I mean, you are calling for justice from the very countries that fund the organization. Are you kidding me? I mean, what are we talking about? I mean, the very countries that fund the organization, fellas, those are the ones you're asking for justice from. Hold on, fellas. How are you going to get justice when somebody's still feeding you? Where are you going to get your justice from? They are still feeding you. They still fund the organizations. That is what is going on. And then you're going to have a theme talking about justice for Africans and peoples of African descent through reparations. Give me a break. I mean, it's about time we take ourselves very seriously, because this is laughable. I mean, you're talking about an organization founded by great leaders with, vision. With vision, talking about the independent African. Go and listen to Kwame Nkrumah's great economic independence speech that he gave the day of independence of Ghana's independence in 1957. Africa's independence is meaningless without the economic independence of all Africans. One of the greatest speech ever given. That was Dr. Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah on the day of independence in Accra, Ghana. That's what he said. He said Ghana's independence is meaningless unless it is linked with the total liberation of all of Africa and its economic independence. And today, 60 years of the founding of the OAU, we're still having a theme at AU Summit, talking about economic justice and asking for justice from the former colonial masters. Come on, fellas. Come on, we should be ashamed of ourselves. I don't know how they came up with this thing, but there's no way I would support a stupid team like this. Because at the end of the day, if you want to fight tooth and nail with somebody that you believe has oppressed you and you deserve something from them, then don't expect those people to be funding your organization. It's that simple. By the end of the day, that is the very people that you are calling out with your team are the very ones funding the organization. That is the problem right there. Because you are not independent. They still control you. They still control you. And I don't give a rat's ass what anybody, when people say, why would you call out African Union and so on and so on? Because at the end of the day, look, whether it is Africa, Asia, Europe, America, it doesn't matter. An organization that has not functioned properly, that has not achieved anything for its member countries, it's useless. That's what it is. It doesn't take 60 years. 60 years is what we are talking about, fellas. 60 years is what we are talking about. And then you hear when they come on this stage, podium, all these African leaders come there and talk big, about what they are going to do, in terms of African natural resources and the developmental plans that they have for Africa and all that stuff. At the end of the day, go back 30, 40 years, 50 years. This has been the same talking points that these leaders have been given going to this summit every year. Fellas, look. I was reading an article in The Economist. The Economist had an article, a very interesting article, fellas. The Economist had a very interesting article. In this article, it says, the Africa gap. This is it right there. It says the Africa gap. Now, you read through this Africa gap, what they are talking about. I know some people sitting in Africa will be saying, looking at Africa right now, they think Africa is developing and Africa is, hold on, fellas. Developing compared to other countries and other continents. I'm just going to read a page of this. The economic gap between Africa and the rest of the world is getting wider, by a guy named John McDermott. The economic gap between Africa and the rest of the world is getting wider. Now, he goes on to show a graph of how Africa, in terms of development, is lagging behind Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the rest of the world. So basically what this is telling you is that you might see glass buildings in your countries. You might see here World Bank economic analysts talking about Africa's economy grew 7%. The fastest growing economic countries are in Africa, all that crap. And at the end of the day, look at your infrastructure and social development. Look at it. That is what this is talking about. That is the gap it is talking about. You look at the gap between Southeast Asia, countries that were basically at par, or Africa was even better than them 60 years ago and where they are today. And that is what this article is talking about. Showing how all those countries have been able to move on and become better, whilst Africa is still stuck behind. That is what this article is talking about. And that is what we have to look at. Don't be listening to these World Bank analysts and IMF analysts talking points about African economy grew 5%, 10%, 7%, all that crap. At the end of the day, look at your development in your country in terms of social development, the level of poverty in your country, the level of poverty, sickness on the continent. That is what we have to look at. That is what we call development. Development is not just by seeing glass buildings and people who have the means to afford to buy expensive cars and so on and so forth. Development is centered on the living standard of the citizens of that community or a country. That is how development is judged by. It's not judged by glass buildings. And that is what this economist in this article that they've written outlining how Africa is behind the rest of the world. And that is what this is all about, fellows. It is unfortunate. It is unfortunate because if you look at where Africa is in terms of natural resources and what the potential that Africa has, and for Africa to be in this quandrum, still to be at the bottom and not moving forward with its socioeconomic development, that is a sign that Africans have to be very worried about. Because at this stage and this era, Africa should be doing way better than where we are right now. Fellows, go back 50, 60 years in most African countries. Most African countries in Africa, and look at the economy of those years, 50 years ago in Africa. Look at the standard of living of their citizens and then compare them to this year. You will see the difference. The Africans have been way better. Doing way better 50 years ago in terms of standard of living of their citizens than it is today. And that is what this economist article is talking about. So even though, yes, you might see the, certain things, the standard of certain things going up, but if you look at the overall economic picture of Africa 50 years ago, and you compare it today, Africans were way better off in their socio-economic development 50 years ago based on their standard of living than what it is today. Outside of maybe about three countries like maybe Botswana, Seychelles, and maybe Namibia or something like that. Other than that, if you look at most African countries, their standard of living today, if you look at their standard of living today and you compare it 50 years ago, most African citizens had a better standard of living than what they have today in this glass building development that exists in Africa today. Even infrastructure-wise, most African countries' infrastructure were in some ways even better shape per population, per capita, than what it is today. And I can speak very well of Nigeria in particular. Because you go back 50 years ago in Nigeria, look at Nigeria in terms of even infrastructure-wise. Nigeria's infrastructure at that time was way better than what it is today in Nigeria. Even though it's trying to catch up. So fellows, this is the reality. This is the reality that African countries have to be dealing with. This notion that every year the AU will have these summits and these leaders will come on the podium and talk big, talk about their potential, what Africa has, and the youth of Africa and all that stuff. And every year for the past 50 years, we haven't been able to move the ball to get to where we are supposed to be in this modern era, compared to Southeast Asia countries that were basically, some of them were even behind most African countries. And we talk about Nigeria. Nigeria was way better, way better ahead of most of these East Asian countries. But today, look at Nigeria and look at these Southeastern Asian countries. They have just zoomed because of bad governance, corrupt leadership, and so forth on the continent. And unfortunately, we still have an organization that prides itself in talking for about asking for justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations from former colonial masters. I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, this is unfortunate, fellas. I mean, this is unfortunate, but this is not what we should be talking about. I get it when it comes to reparations. I get the ins and out of it. But as a continent, we have to be talking about what we can do for ourselves to become better than putting it out there that we're looking out for some reparations. Because at the end of the day, we ain't getting no reparations from them. Because these are the very countries who still control everything. I mean, go to most of African countries, look at the industries that are there. Some go back to the colonial era. And they still have sweet deals. Like Donald Trump is talking about renegotiating deals with countries and stuff in America, you know, turning everything around. Basically scrapping everything. What have we Africans done on the continent for the past 50, 60 after independence? I've never heard any African government talking about renegotiating old colonial era deals. We have given these colonial masters the opportunity to rape us for the past 50, 60 years and still raping us off. And no African government or leader have stood up against these bad deals that were negotiated during colonial era. We're still living under some of these deals in our various African countries. And then you come and have a theme talking about justice for Africans. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I mean, fellas, it is unfortunate. It is unfortunate, but you know what? This is not going to cut it. This is not going to cut it. The African Union, if they want to be respected, if they really want to be respected, then they have to look at the continent and be able to put their teeth where they're supposed to put it. Because you can't just be talking, always talking, without doing the work with it. And that's what they've been doing. Always talk, can't do crap. Always talk. At the end of the day, they go back to the same old status quo. I mean, today we're talking about wars going on all across the continent. All across the continent. Just a couple of weeks ago, almost a month ago, Rwandan army with the rebels were M23, taking towns in DRC, which has a little bit like a little civil war going on down there, with Uganda also mourning whether to involve itself in it or not. And these are the things that the African Union is supposed to be able to stop, but they haven't been able to do anything. They haven't been able to do anything on the continent. I mean, you have the war going on with the Sudanese armed forces and the RSC, the rebel group in Sudan, ripping each other apart, killing thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of people in Sudan. I mean, Sudan should never have been broken up in the first place. It should never have been broken up in the first place. That country should have just adopted the federal system to keep its natural resources together and build upon it. But with the pressure coming from the West, they decided to split that country into two. And still, that country is still fighting today. With all that stuff going on right now, displacing millions of people in that country. And what has the African Union done about that? I mean, fellas. So I mean, look, this is the issue. This is the problem right there. I mean, we have an organization that is bent on talking about former colonial masters. When within our own organization, within the countries in that organization, we have not been able to resolve conflicts. We have not even been able to give justice to our fellow citizens on that continent. Has the AU been fighting for the justices of citizens of their various African countries? Have they been calling out corrupt governments in their various African countries? They haven't. I mean, the leaders who head AU every year, presidents of various African countries, they are all corrupt. So at the end of the day, you have the fox guarding the hen house. The AU organization itself is a corrupt organization. That is why I see it as a useless organization. Unfortunately, it is a useless organization, fellows. It is a useless organization. Very unfortunate, but that's what it is. I mean, an organization that was founded by great leaders with foresight and vision to bring Africa together, to fight as a united force, to be able to represent Africa as a united force against the rest of the world, to build Africa on its natural resources and spearhead Africa's socio-economic development. That is what the organization was founded on. Those principles, led by the great Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. And today, 60 years later, after the founding of such a great organization by these founding leaders, you have members of this organization still talking about justice for Africans and peoples of African descent through reparations. I mean, fellas, they are laughing at you guys in Western capitals. They are laughing because they look at you as a joke. Because you are a joke. That's what you are. I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, this modern era, are you thinking that somehow these Western European countries and America is going to come and give you reparations? And that's what you are waiting for them to come and do? Give you justice? What justice are they going to give you? They haven't given you justice for how many years now, and you think they're going to give you justice for now? I'm sorry, fellas. It ain't happening. It's about time we strap our own boots and forget about them and use what we have, utilize what we have, because we have too much on that continent, fellas. That is what the theme should be. The theme of this year's summit should have been, how do we utilize our resources and unite economically against the rest of the world to build Africa? That is what we should have done. That's the theme that we should have had for this year's summit. Instead of sitting down there calling for Western former colonial masters to give us justice, when we haven't even given justice to our own citizens on the continent. I mean, that sounds more like a hypocrite, isn't it? And that's what they're going to look at us and laugh at us about. I mean, I'm sorry, fellas. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It is unfortunate because at the end of the day, it ain't happening. These Western European countries, they're not going to go back and resolve things that they did in the past and so on and so forth. I mean, it's not happening. It's not happening. We have too much resources on that continent. We have too much for us to be able to utilize what we have to deal and to build and develop our own various African countries. We don't have to be waiting for anybody because we have too much. But if we are still going to be sitting down there, looking at our various African economies, and then somehow, for some reason, sometimes you hear people on social media talking about Africa can do this to America, and America needs Africa, and Africa can do it because China is coming to Africa and America. Hold on, fellas. I like to go with data. Look, California in the United States, one state, its GDP is 4-point-something trillion US. If California is a country, will be the 5th or the 6th biggest economy in the world. Its GDP is 4-point-something trillion, fellas. Okay? All of African countries, 55 countries combined, GDP is about 3-point-something trillion. America don't need Africa. America don't need Africa. So let's take that mindset out. Let's use what we have, develop what we have, and be more about Africa rather than worry about what all those countries outside of Africa are thinking about. Because America don't need Africa. Like I said, California's economy alone is bigger than all of Africa's economies combined. So you take 4-point-something trillion out of California, out of a US economy of $30 trillion, left the $26 trillion. Do you think they really care or need Africa? I'm sorry, fellas. This is the hardest truth. This is the truth. They don't. They don't. They might want Africa in certain things, that's for security against these terrorist groups and all that stuff. I get that. But economically, they don't. And let's get it straight. When I see people on TV talking about how America is this and they say they can do this in America, I'm sorry, fellas. Look at the data. The combined African GDP is 3.6 or something trillion. State of California alone is 4-point-something trillion US dollars. Only state of California. Texas is the closest to Africa. Texas is about 3.1 or 3.2 trillion. Only Texas is closer to Africa. But California's GDP is bigger than all of Africa combined. And then you're going to sit down and worried about what America needs Africa and all that stuff. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's about time we get these things straight and focus on how we can develop our continent. You know, you don't have to have the biggest GDP or anything. As far as you're able to develop your country for your citizens to have a better standard of life, living. That's all you need. Whether you have the smallest GDP or the big, it doesn't matter. As far as your citizens have a good standard of living, that's all it matters. That is all it matters. So let's focus on what we have, build on what we have, and to be really independent. And not be sitting down there waiting for Western Europe and America and Japan to be funding our organizations. And then we're going to call them out and talk about, we are waiting for justice and reparations. Waiting for justice and reparations. Yeah, you haven't gotten justice and reparations for the past 60, 70 years from them, and you expect them to come and give you justice and reparations? I mean, come on, fellas. Let's be serious, man. I'm sorry. It's about time we wake up. We wake up and think ahead, rather than looking backwards to the very people who don't want to see us develop. It ain't happening. And let's think forward and move on. All right, fellas, if it's Sunday, it's the Africa Weekly Talk. God bless you guys. Thank you, and peace and love. Love it.